Hello, everyone. Welcome to my teaching learning session. We start with these BPCE Counseling Psychology, continuing with the Block 2 and Unit 6. Today, we start with a different approach included under the cognitive and behavioral approach, which is the rational emotive behavior therapy. Speaking of this, we are going to discuss the rational emotive therapy, which was also famously called the RET and the REBT. That's the reason that it comes under the cognitive and behavioral approach. Its emergence, assumptions that are going to be coming from this approach, the theoretical approach, where the theories are coming from, and the role of the counselors and the client, the technique and evaluation. So, speaking of this theory is standing completely different from the other theories. It's rational, it includes emotion in this theory, which was irrespective of the drawback that the other theories were consuming in. Now, let's start with the understanding what was rational emotive therapy. Rational emotive therapy spoke about rational emotions and equivalently the rational behaviors. This was given by Albert Ellis. Ellis was the first person to start with any theory which was speaking about emotions, considering emotions and therapies of psychology. And Ellis also realized that the behavioral methods can equivalently apply to the covert processes. So when we state about covert processes, that talks about processes that are something which are visible. So coverts are something which are visible and non-visible processes that we have. So apart from overt behaviors, we are going to talk about applying these methods to covert processes which are not visible. So covert are behaviors, emotions which are not seen, and overt are behaviors and emotions which are seen. So like O means observable, C means covered. So covert processes and internal dialogues that came up with the therapy. So rational emotive spoke up that the behavior methods can be utilized within this and can be structurally helped used to help the clients to structure their mind, to philosophically change their thought process to more radical, to more conventional, and to more rational thought process, and at the same time make sure that the behavioral styles are also corrected. Combining all of this theoretical approach and the empirical rigor, which Albert Ellis strongly held, which means Albert Ellis had a good theoretical approach, which is a strong theory based on which the therapy was based. At the same time, a lot of pilot studies were done on the same so that it had the scientific rigor, the scientific basis on which this therapy could stand. Ellis also defined, he's also defined as using RET for an educational approach to provide psychological interventions to children and students also. Let's come down to the assumptions. RET stands out to be very different from the other therapy, and when we speak about this assumption, we need to know rationality is being stated. That means we are dealing with irrationality, which is behaviors and thoughts which are irrational in nature. These thoughts are generated by the client themselves, and therefore, adding to the REBT, cause of the psychological distress are clients themselves. So, cognition, second, the cognition, emotion, and behaviors are interrelated and interact with each other. That suggests that all the behaviors that we are doing are commonly and most likely to be interrelated by the thoughts that come to our mind, the emotions that we have, and the thinking, reasoning that we do. So, it is rightly suggested that we understand that most of our behavior that we attempt, most of the behavior that we do, are a part of a combination of what are you thinking, what are you reasoning, problem solving in your mind, and the kind of emotion that drives you to do that behavior. You can take it as an example when because of the fact that there are pent up emotions, there are pent up cognitions, and also at times unresolved cognitions and irrational cognitions and emotion. Ellis also believed that an individual's connectedness with other people in the community also determines their psychological well-being, which is true. The kind of people that we are surrounded with, the kind of thoughts, emotions, and the behaviors that we are surrounding with, the kind of people that we live with, obviously defines our psychological well-being. The process of therapy is an educational one, wherein the therapist is an expert. The client takes on to the role of a student, which is considerably the same pattern that we follow. So the assumption stands common in the behavior therapy, in the cognitive therapy, and in the RET that we are doing after the two which come under the same platform also assumes that the clients are going to be students, so they are going to be students and your therapist is going to be an expert. That means the therapist is bound to have the the results, the solutions, the thought process that needs to be corrected for you. Now, moving to more other theoretical framework of Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis stated that we are going to talk about encountering the irrational beliefs, so which are mostly external. So where is this irrationality in your belief system coming from? So the belief is what? Belief is our cognition. Cognitions are the thought thinking patterns, the process of reasoning, the process of thinking is something which is a belief and also a cognition. So beliefs, when turned irrational, which is coming from the external factors, a person usually associate it from everywhere. So let's take an example. If a person feels that he or she is worthless, remember that thought will surround the person not only in a social gathering but also when the person is alone, when the person is interacting with one known person, or when the person is standing alone in a crowd. So the irrationality in the belief is coming from the external environment. Also, a person of importance or significant others is the one who introduces this irrational belief to this individual. That means the irrationality usually is seeded in the child or is seeded in the person from the family in the childhood times. It could be a significant other from the family, it could be a sibling, it could be a teacher who's been a significant other to to the child in the beginning. So remember, the introduction of irrationality comes from where? It comes from a significant or an important elderly individual who is of guidance and who is of support. Now the individual learns that these beliefs, and it's so difficult to get them out of it because we get our values, we get our rituals, our systems of thinking, our system of performing in the society from this significant other. And at the same time, they make us learn an irrationality about ourselves. So remember, if the children is thinking that they are worthless, if the child in today's times think that they are not capable of performing well or they are not capable of doing something, remember it is seeded from a significant other. It is coming not from their own mind. As stated in the beginning, children are born as a blank slate. That means we are born like molds, which can be molded, anything which could be molded into any shape. So the first shape, if you give to the child, is irrationality. Remember, they learn it about themselves. They learn it through that belief, and all their thinking, reasoning, problem solving, decision making is based on that. Now, the second theoretical framework of RET was that the need for acceptance. So one of the most radical viewpoint is the human needs to accept. So if they want to live long and live healthily, is that if they do not accept in order to live healthily, it's going to be a difficult, journey ahead. So the reason, if you feel that you've been worrying about the fact that you're worthless or not wanted, remember, accept it that you've got it from somewhere, or you have probably self-fulfilled it in yourself with the passage of time. Remember, it acknowledges that a lack of acceptance from near and dear ones does cause that irrationality to develop further. So it's extremely important that you accept that where is it coming from. You accept that unconventional thought process that you build in yourself so that you can introspect it well. There are times, when client comes in stating that no, we don't feel, we don't feel like this about ourselves. So when you do not accept your problem in the beginning, remember there's always going to be a lack of understanding. So until acceptance doesn't come in, there would always be a lack of understanding of irrationality. Remember, if this is something which has been seeded by your significant other, you've learned it, and this has also been reinforced further by your near and dear ones in the external environment, this irrationality tends to become very stringent, very absolute, and becomes very self-defeating belief. So from an irrational thought converts into irrational belief and further goes into something which is self-defeating beliefs, which is obviously very, very devastating for children growing, because it not only commands the way you think but also commands the way you behave, commands the way you learn your activities around. Now, an internal dialogue. Internal dialogue in RET has been of great, great importance. The reason? They stated that irrationality is coming from our thinking and reasoning and our behavior and reaching to our behavior. So, internal dialogue, which is often used, usually as a blaming thing to yourself, like I, I should be loved by my father always. My father doesn't love me anymore. My mother finds me unworthy. So I must go to the party today. I must be invited for this event. So, but even if I'm unworthy, a father should be loving me unconditionally. Remember, the shoulds, oughts, and must are something which are the bolted point when we speak about the irrational belief. So, irrational belief, when we speak about the fact of something which is shoulds and must, this is what causes the irrationality to further deepen, because this makes you reinforce that value that you should be doing it. There is no second option, there is no second thought, and there is no alternative beyond it. So this must, shoulds, and oughts are something which is a major feature of the internal dialogue, which we use to blame ourselves. So I must be called to this party. Why must? The reason is why must. So this is something where we need to introspect, and introspection will begin in the beginning when we accept it. So this is a feature that we highlighted, which was shoulds and must. Remember, these are the internal dialogue which are often used by children, often used by people relating to irrationality. And further, two things have happened in this emotion to thought change, which is the thinking that we have as an internal dialogue that was an emotion in the beginning, that I should be loved by my father, I must be invited to the party, I must be loved by my mother unconditionally no matter what. Remember, this emotion is converted. Two things will happen if you convert it into your day to day living thought process. A blame has been assigned to self. You've already labeled yourself as unworthy already in the self labeling internal dialogue, and it's turning into a blaming internal dialogue now. So, the blame that you assign to the self, it has been labeled as a highlighted term which is unworthy. This thought will now have a life of its own. Anytime, the reason that we state that it has a life of its own is anytime you attempt something, this unworthy as a thought process will always haunt you. It will always come in your mind. So this has its, the irrational beliefs have a life of its own, amplifying and validating itself on its own. So it keeps validating your mind time and again. Let's take an example. You did something, did not turn up well. What will you state? I knew I was unworthy. I knew this was something I was not capable of. So that self blame keeps reinforcing and validating your task if they are not done properly. Even if they're done properly and you don't get the desired result, you do not acknowledge yourself for doing it well, but you say, I knew the result wouldn't have been come because I am unworthy. So this is causing harm to the individual, which is another theoretical thought. And second thing that will happen when these irrational thoughts change, irrational emotion changes into thought is that the emotion to thought translation is very rigid and absolute. So this carries an absolutism which is of the irrational thought. Irrational thoughts are very absolute. It's very difficult to change them. It takes a lot for a self help. It takes a lot to change on your own. It is not an easy task. It has greater difficulty to to refute your own oughts, shoulds, and must. Now, let's understand the model. What was the model that they introduced that could have supported the clients to understand where is your problem coming from? The first model that they utilized, which was given by Albert Ellis itself, was the ABC model. He stated that every situation can have be seen as multiple emotional reaction. So in that multiple emotional reaction, we can utilize the ABC model depending upon a way the person processes it. So we can take any example Albert Ellis stated, and we can utilize this model to see the multifaceted emotions that come into play whenever an incident happens. So let's take an example. Whatever happens, the first thing that comes to the mind or that triggers the entire thing is called the A, which is the activating event, the event that causes extreme emotional response. So an event could be where you're not able to finish your task. What is the belief? Now the belief is something that was already there in your mind, and you are reinforcing yourself into play, which is let's take the same example. Feeling unworthy, the belief of a client has developed as a result of the uh, activating event. So let's take an example. The child has not been. Let's take another example where the child has not been, did not were not heard or was not eared by the mother because the mother was very busy. So at that point of time, that situation can be an activating event, and the child suddenly develops a belief. I'm never entertained. I'm ignored. She doesn't listen to me. So see, it's coming again from a significant other. Now, what is the consequence? there are negative feelings. The behaviors that are turning out to negative. The child is holding a very negative mood the entire day, does not eat well, does not talk to everybody. So that activating event has generated a belief which has led to a consequence in that event. Now, let's see. This irrational belief gets reinforced. We just earlier studied it that these thoughts, when are reinforced, validated, they become self defeating. Now, the child goes to the sibling, sibling is busy working into something very important. So the child goes to the sibling and asks, "Can you help me with this right now? It's here and now. I want the support right now." The sibling gets annoyed and say, "Don't you see that I'm working and what you're doing is not very important?" See how now this event reinforces that belief that I am not wanted. I am not entertained the times that I need support and help. So that belief is now holding an absolutism. Now the belief has got rigid. Why? Because it has been validated by another significant other. It's been held strongly by the child now, and the consequences are now going to be negative emotions, negative feelings, and thought process, which arises every time a situation happens. Now, anytime any situation will happen, the ABC model says that it will function in the same pattern. The belief system will, take over all the events that now will happen and lead to the same kind of consequence, which is negative feeling, feelings of shame, feelings of guilt, etc. So, this is the ABC model, which was told by Albert Ellis, which could be utilized to understand where is it all starting from. So after the incidents happen, there's an activating event. We have a belief system. That belief leads to consequences to the incident. Albus explained that it is arising from how we interpret the situation, which leads to negative consequence. For example, if a child does not have a negative belief system and has not been reinforced, or probably if he's also been validated as unwanted, the child still feels, no, I'm not unwanted. Maybe everyone's busy right now to listen to me, but this is not how I am. This is not what I think about myself. So this is different the way you take it. So the arising interpretation is all coming from you. If you change that interpretation of the belief, remember the consequences will not happen. Now, moving ahead, what are the techniques that we talk about in terms of RET? RET utilizes the ABCED technique to take care of the interruption of these irrational beliefs. So let's start with there is working on the thought where the therapist interrupts. This is a part where, in the process where the client shares his belief with the counselor and the counselor objectively sees the belief and questions the belief. Where is it coming from? How was your belief system before when it all started? So we question, we interrupt in between that thought process so that they can understand the breakup of ABC, which is the activating event, the belief system, and the consequence. So this happens in terms of this model, and then we start once the client realizes that this belief was not always unworthy, it was not always unwanted. It was something which was very normal in the beginning. The events like this has catered to develop a belief like that. So then starts the self-correction. Self-correction, the clients in self-correction are given a lot of homework where they're encouraged to identify all the rigid patterns in their mind, all the absolutism, all the shoulds, musts, and oughts that they have believed, to identify them and then to place it in the ABC model and to change them. How does it changes? Let's see the picture here, which is the ABCED, the activity, the activating event or the adversity, or the problem, or this problem situation which has led to developing a belief. Then comes the belief about the event. The belief could be being unwanted, being unhappy, being not conditionally loved. It could be something which is unworthy. This leads to a negative emotion. Negative emotion can also be diseased mind at times. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be further other problems with the children. It could be the reason for failure of the child in academics or social emotional connect with people. Then after we understand the consequence, we dispute with the consequence. That is where the interruption start of the counselors. Disputing of to challenge the irrational belief. So we are challenging irrational belief to understand, is it logically, empirically correct? Have you made it in the right pattern? Is it right to put it in every event when you judge yourself and self-blame yourself? So is your dialogue, internal dialogue, always correct? That's where the interruption begins. And we start telling them and giving them homework to identify where it is all started, how rigid are they, what are they leading to. That realization and disputation leads to an effective development of a new belief system, where you realize that this is not where it started from. It was different in the beginning. So that's where we develop a new belief system and we replace it with the old irrational belief system. So this is how the ABCDE tends to happen in the REBT therapy. Now, it's called rational emotive therapy, and when the behavior techniques are applied, we call it the rational emotive behavior therapy. That's why RET is coming under cognitive and behavior therapies. Let's go on with further more techniques. Becoming an REBT teacher is also very important. Once we make we make our client understand the RET ABCDE model, we make them utilize it comfortably on their own so that they can encounter their irrationality later in life. So when we speak about this, we need to as humans understand that irrationality will strike off every time in the living times, which is, it's not that as children we'll identify it. Maybe as adult we'll identify rationality. Maybe at the times of adulthood also you might feel unworthy, not wanted, not cherished by people, not loved by people. This is a feeling that can come at any point of time. So it's important to make the client an REBT teacher, which is make them practice the interruption, able to identify the AC model, able to understand where is the A, B, and C and what is the C leading to. These identifying exercises are given to them so that they become an effective REBT teacher, and then they can further utilize it for themselves. They can further utilize it for their own support on their own without reaching out to the counselors. After encountering the basic and the general technique, let's come to specific techniques, which is working on behaviors, working on thoughts. So when we have to work on the client's behavior, we have to indulge into language change, and this is also a very good practice that we give to the client, which is simple statement can cause various changes. So when the client is indulging in self-defeating thoughts and self-defeating internal dialogue, that's the time that we need to change the statement for them. We need to tell them when the individuals stating that I am unwanted or I am unworthy, we need to change reasons which has led to this unworthy feeling in me today is this. We make it less absolute. We don't say it all the time. We say it today so we understand this has happened today, it can change tomorrow. Make it less self-blaming, not utilizing that unwanted, unworthy all the time in all your behaviors. So if you're doing an activity at school and you know it's good, making sure that you don't utilize the self-blame there. When you're in very good when supporting your friends and you are always ears to your friends and your friends cherish it about you, you do not use this rigid thought of irrationality there. So making sure that we change the language, make it less rigid, less absolute, and less self-blaming, and making sure it's not even utilized every now and then. Now, working on the emotion. So when we speak about working on the emotion, there are other techniques for this. So rational emotive imagery is something which works on your emotions. This is an intensive technique. It is utilized in different word pattern, like it is labeled as something else in another therapy. So it's rational emotive imagery where it's a very intensive therapy where client are asked to think, feel, and act as they want their healed self to be. So you just act, feel, and imagine yourself you healed. You do not think like that. You do not have belief systems like this. They are even asked at times, they're even asked to imagine the worst of scenarios, the worst and horrible of scenarios. So it's on the two polar ends that we make them imagine, which is rational emotive imagery also happens in the most positive manner, where we make them imagine the best of things, which is make them feel the best of things, the make them report the best of feelings, and at times we give them most intense negative feelings also. So why are we making them do that? The imagery is happening so that if that thing happens in their life, they're able to deal with it better. Let's take an example. Most of us, before giving a call to our friend who we have just had a fight with, we imagine all the various scenarios over the phone. This is something that I could have said. This is something I will be saying now. So in this pattern, what are you doing? You are imagining all the worst scenarios, which is making you more self-prepared. And the more self-prepared that you are, the less would be irrationality and less would be the emotional breakdown and less self-blaming is going to be your irrational thoughts. Then the another thing that we as counselor use is the use of humor. A good sense of humor is a part and parcel of developing, a client therapist relationship, and it's important also for the success of the therapy. See, emotional disturbances also result from individuals seeing themselves too seriously and too burdened and losing themselves in that vast perspective of negativity. So, the reason that we can add value, the reason that we can add that little sense of humor, that tinge of humor into it, will just make them shift from that seriousness and take them to the lighter side of the world so that they enjoy. The reason people are able to make fun of themselves is that they hold themselves in both contexts. They hold a lot of irrationality about themselves, but they even enjoy making fun of them in front of people so that the absolutism, the rigidness of irrationality is lost. The more serious, the more hard that you are on yourself, and the most vastly darken your perspective about yourself is, the whole picture is going to be dark, the whole picture is going to be negative. So using a appropriate sense of humor by the client will also support the by the therapist will also support the client to see it lightly and to enjoy it and not take it too harshly on themselves. Then is shame attacking, which is Albert Ellis devoted much time to develop ways to get his client rid of their self-destructive blame. So he created exercise and encouraged his clients to stubbornly refuse to feel ashamed. So they always kept interrupting and telling them, why do you need to feel like this? What is the reason? And if they answer it, and they answer it in a self-defeating pattern, that I'm not loved by people, that's why I feel I'm unworthy. I'm never called for any invitation, that's why I'm feeling unworthy. We question them so that they come to an extent where the logic finishes. Their illogic thoughts and their irrational thoughts do not have answers, and then they can dispute and give a very healing rational thought. So self-attacking is one of the most important thing. There are no exercises for this, and there are no homeworks for this as given. Then let's come to understanding after the techniques that we finished. We go back to this again. It was working on the thoughts, self-correction, which talked about A, B, C, D, E, becoming an REBT teacher, which we insist the client to be, working on the behaviors, working on the emotions, and that finishes with all the techniques. These techniques are very self-evolving and involving both for the client and the therapist. It's one of the most active therapies that you do, where emotionally you are charged up or your client is triggered. So it's a very emotionally captivating and triggering therapy. So I feel that here both the client and the therapist needs to be very active and very vigilant. If you're not, remember, the therapies are going to be in pain and it's not going to cost you any benefit. Now let's understand what is the role of the therapist in the therapy. See, the role of the therapist is someone who is an expert, who is someone who knows, actually accepts the client unconditionally, which is provide them unconditional positive regard, accept their irrational beliefs openly, and also knows how to reject them openly. Being the expert, the counselor usually view the client as the one who can make mistakes, and it's normal to make mistake. And until you are not capable of understanding your mistake, you will not be capable of leading a healthy and successful life. So for the therapist, it's normal to hold such beliefs. It's okay to hold such negative thought process about yourself. And REBT requires counselors to be great communicators because we need to use a good sense of humor, we need to refute, we need to interrupt their negative thoughts and irrationality. They need to be very well versed with all the techniques of REBT, competent enough, active, and very directive. The reason that the term directive is stated so that you don't lose track of the therapy. There are times that the client keeps talking about their irrationality, gets very serious. So that's the time, indulging into humor, indulging into the lighter side of the world can just get them out of that picture of darkness. That's why the role of the therapist is to be great communicators, very well versed with the technique, understanding that it's normal to have such thoughts and it can be shamed and removed from the client's mind. So here the therapist is equally active and seen as an expert. Now, role of the client. See, the client is seen as a student only who actively comes to get their irrational thoughts removed. And we actually support the client is supposed to work hard continuously and continually to grow. So that's a pattern of life. So REBT works on a very philosophical terms also that we discussed in the beginning, that it's normal to do mistakes. Mistake happens and that's how the life gets better because you change those mistakes, live better, understand, cope, and adapt. So it's a cycle that they talk about. Client must work hard so that continually they are able to grow. Continually they are able to acknowledge themselves both in the right and wrongs and acknowledge their problems. Once they acknowledge their problems, they'll solve the problems and move ahead. More problems will come, acknowledged again, and solve again. So that's like the role of the client is to be active, diligent, open to work, and understanding and accepting their problems. Another thing, how is the client and the counselor relationship here? The client and counselor relationship is a little related to a student, a student and a teacher relationship here. The only thing that we highlight here is the complete acceptance. The client should come up with a thought that I'm coming to the therapist to get my problem solved, and I have a problem. Until that honest and complete acceptance from the client does not come to the therapist. Remember, the more honesty comes from the client and more expectation comes from the more honesty and diligence come from the therapist, and more expectation and acceptance comes from the client, it doesn't function. That means the therapist should be genuine and honest, unconditionally giving to the client, and the client should expect things will happen right, and I need to do the same. So this it's a very beam balance sort of a thing. Some things done by the client and the some correct things done by the therapist. That completes with the understanding of what the RET and REBT therapy comprises of. Very active therapy. By the therapy, we understood that it's just not the client working or the therapist working. This is a very 50-50 sort of a companionship that we have. Different aspects of that 50-50% goes to the client and the therapist, but they need to both be vigilant, both be open and accepting the problem. Now let's evaluate, how is this therapy and is it really applicable in the society today? Yes, REBT can be applied to a lot of other things, not only children and individual and family, but also marital. And it has produced outcomes for individuals with anxiety, depression, psychotic disorders, also, and a lot of hostility that they experience in day to day living. So it is equivalently good and healing for psychotic disorders also. Apart with neurotic, which is depression and anxiety, negative feeling, hostility, it's also very fruitful for psychotic disorders. Now, REBT can also be applied in group sessions, and like some people experiencing shame feeling and guilty feeling, very common thought process. They all can be sat together. Basic techniques can be given to all and challenge their irrational belief systems together. Why do we do it in group wise? Because here the intensity of the problem and irrationality is something which is very regular. Multiple people have it. So the more group that you do it, the more alike that they feel about themselves. They feel many people have it. We all can work through it. So the shame attacking comes very quickly, like the technique. RET is suited for both mild to psychological, moderate psychological ailment and also at difficult ones too. Then let's come to the limitation. What are the problems with REBT? Seems like a very active working therapy and a very, very versatile therapy too. When I say uses, it gets used in psychotic disorders also, neurotic disorders also. There is a problem of power imbalance. Why? Because we are teaching the therapy to the client. Here, the concept of teaching is there, which is combined with the power of the therapist over the client. So there are times where the client might feel very dragged upon. Client might feel that, oh, I have to do everything that the therapist is telling me. So there is a feeling of high power to the therapist, which might cause a lot of imbalance. There could be possibility that the client leaves the therapy in the middle, does not entertain it later, etc. Ignoring the client's problem at times, REBT emphasizes primarily in the problem. It's a primarily problem intervention technique where we focus everything on the problem, because our thing is to identify the irrational belief. Our major agenda is to identify where is the irrationality coming from and what is the irrationality. And everything else, is considered secondary in the scope of therapy. So when we do not cater to the client holistically and we only cater to the problem, yes, at times the client does feel ignored and the other problems of the client might take up a back seat. The confrontation style is also a little problem. REBT encourages therapists to challenge clients' irrational belief. This confrontation is not suited to all. The reason is there are some people, when you confront them, might feel very defeated. They might feel very inferior because they are not capable of disputing with you. They are not capable of, arguing and confronting that problem with you. This happens on our day-to-day language also. Don't we see our friends, partners, all living in the same platform, going through the same kind of problems? But one could be very confronting. Other one wants to politely address the problem and wrap up the problem. Someone wants to go to the root of the problem and take it out from there. So, as said, the confrontation problem is something that does not suit everybody, does not go to everybody well. And the last limitation and the problem with the therapy is that the balancing the past and the present. See, while all forms of behavior and cognitive therapy focuses on the present concerns, completely runs on the present, it ignores the past. It ignores the childhood experiences, ignores everything which is coming from the past. Remember, the irrational belief at times can be an emergence or starting might have happened in the childhood times. So, probably this ignorance is not a bliss. This ignorance can cost a lot to the therapist and the client and even the therapeutic relationship. So, completely running on the present is not something which is always favorable. So some of the limitation is power imbalance, ignoring the client's other problems, the confrontation style which might not be suiting all, and balancing the past and present. We forget that our irrational beliefs are an outproduct from the early times. They could have started at the age of 4, 5, and we've ignored it. We are not paying attention to it because it's in the past. So that is where we talk about limitations coming into play. So now, once we finish with all the therapies, let's begin with the counseling techniques and skills. So if we want to understand how counseling happens, we need to pinpoint the major pointers. That these are the bold point to understand how does therapy happens. What are the skills that you need to start, imbibing or learning and inquiry that we talk about. So the first that we will start, this is the unit 7, counseling skills and technique ones. So technique 1. So there is rapport formation that we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about a new technique, which is person-centered counseling technique. Some basic skills that we all should have while counseling. Two major intervention, reporting techniques that we have, which is case history and interview. Psychoeducation, an extremely important thing for all the counselings of any kind. Conflict resolution, crisis intervention, and grief and bereavement counseling. This is something which is not talked upon most of the time and is the need of the hour today, because post-pandemic, post the calamities that are coming to countries, crisis intervention and grief counseling holds a lot of importance in our country and should, I feel, grow leaps and bounds. It should, it's the need of the hour. Now, let's start the understanding of what is rapport building and is it really that important? What is rapport building? It's the unique relationship, that specific relationship with the that add meaning to the counselor and client relationship. See, the effective of the counseling completely depends on the counseling relationship. So, rapport formation in the beginning will lead way to the kind of counseling relationship that you form. So, maintaining a continuous process throughout is rapport building. Usually rapport building starts with general question answering, demographic information taken, asking the general questions of how the person is feeling. Is it the right time to start with the interaction? So this is, hope you're feeling comfortable in the room. Is the light fine? Do you want another chair? Do you want to relax further? This is to lighten the therapy in the beginning and also to make them comfortable. Not questioning them very probingly in the beginning will be more lighter on the side of the establishment of rapport. Also, establishment of rapport helps in building trust and confidence of the counselor in the client. So once you're able to take care of the smaller comfort of the client feels willing and open. They feel trusted. They feel I should be speaking more because they are taking charge of my safety. They are taking charge of me and they're effectively going to deal with it. The more care and concern, this is something that we can see in our day-to-day life. Ever put it in your life and see. Any friend who takes care of your smallest of problems and listens to you is the one that, are the ones that you speak out, pour out to more. Similarly, is the counseling process. The better that you rapport build with the client, the more that you feel interested in them, the more confident that you feel, and you really feel that they are the confidants that I want because they are taking care of smallest of needs of mine. They're understanding my problems effectively and they're the right people. Also, rapport building is considered to be the foundation of counseling. It indeed is one. The better that you form a rapport with your client, the better the client is going to remember you and will come back to you at the times of challenges and issues. And the comfortable the client feels in the beginning, the open that they are going to be, and the more that they're going to talk about their issues and challenges. Remember, where you have restricted yourself in rapport building, the client will also restrict themselves, feeling that the therapist might not feel right about it. I should not be saying it to them. They've never expressed a concern regarding this. So the more you open yourself, the more flexible that you get, the more concerning that you get, And the more you center the client, remember, the better it's going to be. Also, counselor can work in the following ways if you want to rapport build with your client better. See, set a foundation for building a trust. Like, always set a foundation on trust and confidentiality. Take their consent, ask them if they're comfortable. Anytime you pen something down, which is you write your therapies, please ask them, are you comfortable? Can I jolt out points? If you don't want, I'll close it. This builds trust and that sense of privacy in them, that okay, my topics and my talks and conversations are going to be intact here, not going anywhere. Briefing about the role of the counselor is extremely important. Making sure you tell them your title, I feel, which will help in a collaborative relationship. Also, at the same time, being more predictable and consistent is important. See, this is not these are not wins and fancies and a passing thing. It's something which lies on the base of authenticity. So make sure your behaviors are always predictable. You don't act unpredictable here. Be consistent. Give your appointments, give time, have a consistent amount of behavior and emotions where the client is telling you something. Don't act surprised. Don't obnoxiously shun down their thoughts. Don't act astonished by their conversation. This leads to unpredictability and shock to the client. And the more that you keep doing it, the more that you're going to repress the rapport formation. So that completes with some point that we need to take care of. And now, as we talk about rapport formation, there was a therapy which was completely centered on the client, which was called as the person-centered therapy, given under the foundation of Carl Rogers, who is the humanistic therapist. And this was also called as the Rogerian therapy or Rogerian counseling, or client-centered counseling, or person-centered counseling. There are a variety of terms which are used for this therapy. It's a very small therapy. It's called CCT, which is client-centered, PCT, person-centered, and it's a non-directive supportive therapy. Non-directive, we are not very probing. We don't confront too much here. It's scientifically very rigorous. This therapy has been pilotly done on multiple, topics on a population, and equally has a good theory behind it. So theoretical approach and scientific rigor both are combined. So it's both scientific and both useful, which is giving out results also, and scientific has its roots in psychology. The therapy provides a very warm relationship, and the client can reconnect to their disintegrated self. Remember, this therapy is usually for adjustment, failures, people lacking the meaning of their life, people feeling alone. When the sense of loneliness just crops in, and incapable, where irrationality has just come into play, readjusting. So, the main key concept of person center PCT is empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard that you should be giving to the client. Empathy is what? The client's endeavor to understand like the client. The therapist endeavor to understand like the client, which is being in the person's shoe, feeling the pain like being in their shoe. So that is like the first thing, empathy. Empathy is also a skill and characteristic that you should hold when when you're counselors. Then is congruence. Congruence is the therapist is genuine with their interaction. So what you speak and do is in line with what you feel and what are you doing for the client. So it's being in the straight line. Congruency is maintaining the same consistency in your thought, feeling, and behavior. Did we realize something? Apart from treating the client, it's also developing skills in yourself. Until you do not develop these skills in yourself, remember, you are not that complete counselors. And when you are not that complete counselors, remember, you're not giving that complete therapy to your clients. There is some missing that will always be there. Then we come to unconditional positive regard, which is total acceptance of client's thought, the way he, she, or he is. Show a very non-judgmental attitude. You should be not. You should hold a very positive and accepting view of them. Like, at times people come for a smallest of problems for client-centered therapy. Like they can come for value-defeating things which are new, like extramarital affairs. They can come for cheating in their life. They could come for conning somebody. Remember, you still have to accept them. You cannot tell what you did was wrong. That's what is unconditional positive regard. We need to first understand the problem of the client before we show them suggestions, before we start acting like a teacher to them, which is not the kind of relationship that the PCT follows. In conditions which are value defeating to you, you need to listen, be non-judgmental. When you feel you cannot really treat the client, please give reference. Don't continue counseling. That is what PCT says, person and client-centered says. Some important features of client person-centered techniques. Client is treated as a person and not a patient. We treat them as normal individuals going through life and taking, like everybody. Client is equally active. We don't set, make them sit passively. Okay, tell your problems. It's like repeatedly indulging in conversations, repeatedly indulging in activities with them where they speak and you interact. So they're not passive. Also, Kharkov in 1969 stated few conditions which list you as the Rogerian counseling, which is holding respect, confronting, immediacy, being very concrete, and self disclosure. Confrontation is the right time where you need to confront them. Immediacy is staying in the present and here and now of the problem. Don't go to very past problems, please. Stick to the problem here, solve it, and then think about something else. Concrete, which is not asking vague questions. Don't make them indulge in random daydreaming. That's extremely wrong as therapist. And also a little bit of self disclosure from your side so that it allows them to become entrusting on you, develop that confidentiality and sense of privacy and safety in you. So these are some important characteristics that we had of person center. Now, further other things which are important as skills. What are the basic skills to counseling? Trust building, very important. You need to have that rapport building. If that's not done, remember the first step is not happening in counseling. How do you move to the next? That's the first. Before you even ask the intake questions, interviews, you need to develop rapport. Attending skill is very important. As counselors and therapists, we always not only see the physical changes in them, we also see the psychological changes, which is we also see the non-verbals in the clients. They're shifting their body when questions which are difficult come in. They're moving away from you when you ask them difficult questions. That gives us a lot about the, about your client. They're closing their entire body when they feel uncomfortable, and smiling and getting an answer when they feel okay, this is being addressed, my problem is now being addressed. So checking out nonverbals is extremely important. Also, some way Gerald again labeled it and sorted out as a solar thought, which is sitting squarely. If your client is comfortably sitting squarely openly, then leaning front, has a good eye contact, and sitting relaxed, which is square position, open body. The body is not closed. They're leaning towards you. Whenever the counselor is sitting at back, and anyone, you can. This Gerard Egan gave this as an acronym, which I feel now in today's life can be utilized with people who are giving interviews also or taking. So if you're leaning back, that means you're still not open to the interview. Leaning a little in front with your hands up, sitting squarely, confidence. Good eye contact, confidence again, and trust also, and knowing the here and now. And relaxed position, not tightening of the body, tells you that you are ready for it. You have completely surrendered yourself to the situation. Then active listeners. Active listening is extremely important in any of the counselings, I feel. So it's actually a basic skill. Active listening is very difficult. Why it's very difficult? Because we are also there to help you. So we want everything to happen quickly. So remember, it's different from passiveness. Passiveness is not communicating at all, verbally and non-verbally. So your active listeners are verbally and non-verbally interacting adequately. Observation skills should be good, which is you need to check their body position, their postures, their gestures. How are they groomed? What are their expression? Or what are they trying to tell you emotionally or behaviorally, which they do not put on their mouth? Then the voice tone of the counselor is extremely important. Remember, if the voice tone of the counselor is too lethargic, too toned down, they probably might not be in the mood. Remember, this equally should be considered in therapist and counselors, and therapist, counselors, or client. Then, speaking of, counselors need to have the skills of questioning. Questioning skills are very important. Open questioning, closed question, probing, non-threatening questions. They need to be very prepared that what time and what kind of inter confrontation require what kind of questioning. So when we start with the therapist, you cannot ask probing questions. You need to ask very close question like name, when did the problem start, today, tomorrow, are you comfortable being, so it's very closed. Then from close we start with open-ended questions, which is asking them, do you always feel the same way when such events come in, or such thoughts are coming in every event? So this is non-probing. We are not asking them, what is your problem? Where is this problem coming from? Why do you hold them so strongly? These are piercing questions. We actually go in for non-probing questions, something which silently dwell into the client and supports them. Then we need to have the feeling of reflection, which is paraphrasing and summarizing. See, paraphrasing is, for example, a client tell you that I usually feel uncomfortable when people are interrogating my capacity. I feel threatened. So we should not be. So if you want to understand it well, therapists paraphrase it. Why? How? So we tell them. So you told me that every time that people question your capacity and your ability to do something, or ability to perform right now, to do something and give you a task immediately without instruction, you feel intimidated. So did you see how did I add up more things to the paraphrasing? This is for the client's clarity also, and also for the therapist's clarity. We can use paraphrasing a lot of times in conflicts in life to gain more understanding of a problem. Summarizing and paraphrasing is very good for understanding verbal and non-verbal communication. So these were some basic skills. Now we come to the two main techniques. Technique as in some intervention assessment ways that we use in most of the therapy. First is case history, then we come to interview. What a case history? Case history is in-depth information taking from the client about their symptoms, feelings, thoughts, insight, etc. This is the first-hand information which comes from them. Talks about history taking, about their name, all the demographic information, all the educational background, psychological health, medical health. So that's like case history, which is, and also taking history from past many years. So that's why it's the in-depth information. You might ask them questions of their health and their feelings from past 2 years. So you might go on incidences of the past 2 years. So this is first-hand information, usually very authentic. We also take case history. We take second-hand information, which is written on the books, asked from the siblings or the parents or the partners, etc. The second most popular and widely used clinical assessment in interviews, because interviews comes in many format. So it is low cost also, easy to take. Talks about both non-verbal and verbal, very flexible. Verbal interviews, you are able to see your client. It's such a one-on-one, a good rapport formation happens in interview. Interview is a major tool. I feel it's a very understated thing, but interview is something that we use every time, everywhere. In any kind of therapy, the first thing that we will go in for to understand the diagnosis, which is the problem, is interviewing. Many kinds of interview comes into play. There are group interviews, there are individual to individual, individual to group, and the two major type is structured and unstructured. Structured interviews are ones which have a predetermined set of questions. Unstructured are very flexible, open-ended. You make the questions there and then. So your questions will be made on the basis of the answers which are given by the client. So it's very flexible, very open, very warm also. The intonation of the client, the pauses in between, the rate of the speech is taken care of. Whereas in the structured one, we need to be very quick. So I feel the more flexible one serves the purpose depending upon the situation. In interviews, you need to have the right amount of pauses, gestures, eye contact. Your face should not give multiple expression to confuse the client. Very important as such. Then we come to psychoeducation as a new topic. What is psychoeducation? Is such an important thing, so underestimated in nowadays. It refers to the education given to the client's family or to the client to understand their psychological problem. Let's take an example. A client has been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. We need to equip the client. What is it? What is the threat? How long are you experiencing it? What can be the further defects for it? So it's educating the family beings in your kins, to tell them that this is the kind of problem that they're going through and what can be the immediate coping that we can provide them. Talking about the cause, symptoms, we also provide them prognosis. What is prognosis? The prevalence of how much can be cured and how much not. Remember, if someone is going through depression from 5 years, we cannot tell them that we can treat the individual in 2 days and let them go. We need to tell them the therapies will go for almost 1 year and long, because it's a long stated depression. Telling them what kind of feelings that they have, what is their emotional state. This will actually evaluate what will be their quality of life right now and how it will change in future. Psychoeducation is very important to understand what kind of environment your client should get. So immediate help, how much can we leave them alone? Is it important? So the smallest of nitty-gritties are checked with psychoeducation. Very important, should be given after psychotic disorders, neurotic disorders, for children and their prognosis problem, marital problems, educative problems, everything. Then we come to smallest of things that happens in counseling, which is conflict resolution. What are conflicts? Conflicts are threats that we get on our needs, interests, and concerns. It's the chaos and the disagreement which happens with contradictory need. Should I go to the party or meet my friend? Should I do my work or sit and watch my favorite film? It's a conflict, smallest of conflict. For a person having adjustment issue, should I go to the party or make my presentation? Very conflictual situation. Resolutions are important because conflicts are very natural and unavoidable. When we are resolving things, remember to see all the perspective, problem from all the side. If it remains unsolved, remember causes long-standing physical, mental ailments and problems to the well-being. Pro- Conflict should be dealt there and then. You should not let it rest for years. It's going to harm you. And human beings need respect, control, and fairness and their space. So most of the conflict resolution can take place like this. And conflicts are of various kind: intra, inter, intergroup, and intragroup, which is within you, with amongst people, amongst the group, and with other groups. So there could be conflicts of many kind that we can talk about. Then we come to a new kind of interventions that is, as I said, coming into play, which is crisis interventions, widely applied for brief time. Crises are what? Traumatic events suddenly happen, like seen an accident, or some, not a near and dear one, just saw an accident, just led to a harsh, devastating experience to you. So it's given to people with separation, loss of money, divorce, accidents, robbery, fire. These techniques are very short term, takes care of here and now. Do not go to the past. This was given by Stewart W. Crisis intervention are usually emergency first aid given to people going through earthquake calamities, usually for that. Some elements of this is that we assess the situation, educate the client, provide them support, giving what is the help, strengthen their coping skills and their strength and reduce their weakness, and go on with it. The last is grief is similar to the crisis intervention. Again, very it is short lived. It is also called the bereavement therapy. Need of the hour happens and given to people under shock when they lose something: death of family, death of property, family, friend, pet, partner, etc. It was initially given by the National Cancer Institute as grief counseling. Losing a dear one leads to a lot of emotional and physical problem and pain. Support groups are there which are provided in grief counseling. We give grief counseling so that we navigate that the loss is done and what are the changes that you can give now. Practical decisions are made of here and now. We do not go back to their past life. We usually tell them to get supported. So what are the different techniques? Talk therapy, CBT is given, a little mindfulness. We give them acceptance and commitment therapy and some activities which are given to them. In the next time, we will continue with music therapy, which would be Unit 8, and continue in understanding what is music therapy. Music therapy also supports our grief counseling. Piece of music used as a purpose to solve the problem and the grief and ace communication with people. That starts with the new unit and finishes our unit today to continue with music therapy for the next time. Thank you. Hope you understood. Thank you so much.